Edinburgh to come to Antcon, and a lot of people come all the way from Edinburgh as well. And my talk thing, I think, Killer Queens. I felt obliged to put in where that reference come from for those anybody under the age of 50, like Freddie Mercury there. So I'm going to be talking about Killer Queens, which is basically talking about colony foundation in some of my favourite British species of ant, and that is the ant related to Lassus umbratus, so Lassus umbratus and its relatives. And I'm going to tell you about what we know about their colony foundation behaviours, but largely based on my own observations over the years. Okay, so I've been interested in ants, well, obsessed with ants all my life, for as long as I can remember. And I was raised in Kent, travelled around a bit, lived in America for a few years, but I've lived in Edinburgh for a long time. And some of the videos I'm going to be showing you for that local environment. Also about me is that recently, last year, I'll turn this on, I've co-published, co-authored this book in the Naturalist Handbook series on British ants. Despite the title, it's exclusively about British ants. So hopefully, those of you like people with exotic species, this is hopefully going to stimulate you, show the interest in some of our latest species. So this book is available, was published last year. I've got a copy here if you want to see what it's like. It's pretty a meaty book here. If you want to have a look before you buy it, then feel free to have a look at that.
Have you got some copies?
I don't have any copies, unfortunately. But yeah, you can get them from Amazon and other good
Sam's got it.
in HBS and so on. So it's a meaty book, 300 pages. It contains ecology information and identification information, like identification keys on all the British species. So I drew all the diagrams for that particular part of the book. And information and distribution maps of known distributions and records for all the British species as well. And it's the last edition of this book was 1996, so this is a badly needed extra edition. We know a lot more about the species in Britain than we did in 1996 when the first edition was published, and I wasn't to do with that. So this is Lassus flavus, for instance, the yellow meadow ant. So that's by way of introduction. Now, in terms of killer queens, I'm going to start off thinking about, well, what do we know, kind of commonly know as like the classical method by which ants start a new colony, the way we kind of view it. So we're going to start off with Lassus flavus, the yellow meadow ant. Very common British species. It's subterranean, you don't see it above ground, but we know it's very common because it's very visible above ground by virtue of the mounds. Doesn't always make mounds, but when it does, it forms these very characteristic locations in unplowed pastures and so on. So common ant, a very good beginner species to keep into keeping species. So how does the yellow meadow ant, Lassus flavus, found its nest? This is the kind of the classical way you learn about how ants found nests. So the winged queens, the future queens, and the males will be released in a big mating flight. They will mate, and then the queens will fall to the ground, or land, I should say. And then they will tear their wings off, and they will wander around a bit and find somewhere where they can dig a hole or go under a stone, and then they'll seal themselves off from the outside world and lay eggs, and they'll raise their brood. Now, the important thing is they have to do that alone, without any help. They feed the larvae just from regurgitation using their own body reserves. So they have to have a large amount of body reserves. And eventually, maybe after a year later, the first workers will appear. And of course, then they will take over the running of the colony. But even at that stage, they're still very vulnerable until they've built up more workers. So eventually you get to a large colony. So this is kind of the classical view of how ants found colonies. Clearly, this is a very risky step. Most of these queens are going to die, right? So the queen has to carry a huge amount of body reserves, of food stores. That makes them very juicy targets for predators like birds, and also makes them very heavy. They don't fly very well, actually. If you've seen any like Lassus niger flights, the queens are really kind of ungainly. And at this stage, they're very vulnerable to predation. Other ants will very often kill incipient nests in their territory for these kind of early stages. So it's a risky business. Maybe less than 1% of queens are actually successful. Probably a lot less than 1%. So it's not surprising that many ant species have evolved colony foundation strategies that try to get rid of this risky step, right, in one way or another. And that's where the other 4 yellow Lassia species that we have in Britain come in. So they have a very different method of colony foundation. So these are the 4 species I'm talking about. That is umbratus, mixtus, medionalis, and saphilarum. And they are special. They have a lot in common with each other, and they're special and so different that they form their own little group within Lascius, a different subgenus. This is called, well, anyone want to kind of have a guess or have a stab at pronouncing what the subgenus is called?
Funny lad.
I say yesterday, so let's go first. Come on, Billy.
Anything Lazarus is like Profondo Lazarus.
I thought it was like Cthulhu. Cthulhu Lasius or something.
I don't know Lascius is what I say. Lascius, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter. We all know what we're talking about. But yes, Cathono comes from the underworld, Hades, basically. And so it means they're subterranean, just like Lascius flavus. They don't come above the ground, and so this alludes to the fact that they remain under the soil. So these are 4 different species, but actually the workers are not very special. They look very similar to Lascius flavus. In fact, they're very hard to tell apart. Even for specialists, they can be hard to tell apart from each other and from Lascius flavus. But they're not very commonly recorded compared with Lascius flavus, which is a very common ant, probably the commonest ant in Britain. These are not many records, not many recent records for these species. That's partly because they're probably quite rare, as we see because of the strategy they use, but also because it's very hard to tell them apart, and so there's not many people who can tell them apart when they find these species. So that makes them quite interesting in their own way. But what makes them really interesting is how they found their colonies. So before we get to that, I have a Lascius umbratus colony. This is the biggest colony I keep. They're very easy to keep, very docile. Compared with Lascius niger, they're very easygoing, just like Lascius flavus. So you might recognise the nest up there. Very nice one. This is my Lascius umbratus nest. Work is very nice, maybe a bit paler than flavus, but that might be just the lighting in this particular video. But they're very docile. So in terms of killers, these are definitely not killers. They're very docile and easygoing. So the woodpeckers themselves are what make these species unique. What it is the queens. The queens are very different from species like Lascius flavus, or in this case Lascius niger. So clearly this is the queen that has the big body reserves to found its own colonies. So this looks very different. This is a queen of Lascius umbratus, a wandering queen after it's mated and got lots of wings. Again, stolen from the Antantics website here. Sorry. What are the key anatomical differences here, which will suggest what the strategy might be? What do you notice mostly?
The abdomen size.
Yeah, okay. So the abdomen or the gaster is a lot smaller. Why do you think that is? Well, it comes to that. No. Well, you'll see immediately they'll play oscillates, but there's a reason why it's smaller, and we'll come to that. Yes. What else is different?
Bigger.
Hairy, but that's not the most obvious thing I would say. The jaws. Okay, well the head I'd say is maybe not so obvious here. The head is larger. These are roughly to the same scale, and a larger head in ants doesn't mean they're brainier. No, it means they got massive jaw muscles, so they got more powerful jaws. Right. So this gives some clues to their different life strategy. They don't have big body reserve, and they have fighting jaws, particularly. Okay. So the way they found the colonies is quite different. This is they have mating flights, just like Lascius flavus. The queens will mate, fall to the ground, take their wings off, and then they'll wander around. But instead of digging their own little hole and sealing themselves in, they'll seek out the nest of another Lascius species. In the case of Lascius umbratus, Lascius niger is a species it will seek out. We call this the host species for this particular ant. Okay, so it seeks out a colony. and it will try to do a one ant invasion of that colony. Maybe tens of thousands of workers there. So this is really quite a risky thing. It will try to infiltrate into the colony, and if it's successful, the host workers will accept it as their rightful queen. We'll talk about how that happens, right, in a second. At that point, once they've accepted this queen, somehow the host queen dies. And it's kind of assumed that the invading queen kills the host queen, but we don't actually know that. It's never been observed, as far as I know, in real life, because it's of course happening in the ground. So we don't really know that happens. Sometimes it could be the workers themselves that are killing their own queen. So we don't know. So that's not really what I'm calling blind colonies killer queens. That's not the main thing. But anyway, what happens is now, of course, the only eggs being laid are so this queen will now start laying eggs, tended by these host workers. The only eggs being laid are that's some braster's eggs. So you get yellow ants emerging, right? And for a while, you have a mixed colony where you have black workers and yellow workers together. And this is very, very, very obvious when you find a mixed colony. But that's temporary. That's a temporary situation because, of course, as more yellow workers are being made, the black host workers are getting old and they're dying off and they're not getting replaced. So eventually, you get a pure colony of Asses umbratus, right? And it's founded a nest without going through that difficult early stage. It's gone through another difficult process of trying to invade a nest. That's not easy still, but it's not gone through that early stage. So it hasn't needed the high level of body reserves, which is why it's much smaller. Yeah. So it's got over that. So we call this a temporary social parasite. So it's parasitized the Niger colony to form its nest, but it only temporarily required the Niger workers. Once it's got enough of its own workers, it doesn't need the Niger workers, which is why it's called a temporary social parasite, as opposed to a permanent one. Okay. So, yeah, why are they killer queens? It's because this invasion process here, we don't know quite how it works, but we do know that part of the process is that this queen will wander around the entrance of the host colony. It will grab a worker and it will kill it, and it will chew it for a long time. So this is where killer queen comes in. This is where the jaws we definitely know are used, because we can see this because we often find queens wandering, hovering around outside that's its Niger nest with a dead worker in its jaws, and it would chew that worker and wander around with it for a while. So this shows that. So this is where we definitely know the killer queen kind of idea comes in. And yeah, you can find this relatively frequently. So I observed one of these situations in a very unlikely setting. I came down from Edinburgh to visit some relatives in Kent, and going back to the station, to go back to Edinburgh, I walked past a Lassius Niger nest at the wall, and being who I am, I thought, oh, that's nice. I'll have a look at that. Like you do. And there are two queens kind of hovering around the nest, and they were clearly not Lassius Niger queens. They were Lassius umbratus queens. One of them had a worker in its jaws, so that was really nice to see. The other one did not. So I took that one with me, took it back home alive. And back home, I took some Niger workers from my garden, put them together with that queen within a small plastic box and see what would happen. And what happened was very dramatic. I didn't even get the start of what happened because it's so quick. The queen immediately grabbed a worker, killed it within seconds, and just chewed on it for hours, basically. So that behavior was reproduced just in that situation, just by putting them together in the box. What does this do? Why, you'd have thought there's tens of thousands of workers. They're not trying to intimidate by this. It's thought that maybe what they're doing is trying to obtain some of the colony odor. So the colony will have its own distinctive odor, and then the queen may be trying to absorb some of that odor, because it will chew and dismember that worker for hours and maybe grab another worker and do the same thing. So that's maybe helps the workers to be accepted within the colony in the first place. Right. Once it is accepted into the nest, this is my own Lassius umbratus colony again. Once the queen's accepted, it ceases to become a killer. After that, it just calms down, becomes as docile as any queen. And its abdomen does swell up. It will lay a lot of eggs because it's fed by the workers. So it lays huge numbers of eggs when it's within the colony itself. So that's Lasius umbratus, the one that's the most frequent of these species, and it's the one we know most about. It's the one we most frequently find these queens wandering around. Now, as to this meridionalis, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. It's much rarer than Lasius umbratus. It's only found on a very small number of locations, but one of them is quite close to here, in Vic, just down the road, really. So it's only found in a very few. It's quite rare within Britain as a whole. So again, I was lucky to find it. These are some workers from me sort of digging into the YouTube a little bit. Just again, another kind of yellow Lasius species. These are workers, some queens, winged queens, and some males there. So, yeah, meridionalis just means a southern Lasius for some reason. Umbratus means the Lasius of the shadows going to its subterranean. These are the workers. Again, nothing special about them. In fact, they're extremely hard to tell apart from Lasius umbratus in this case. The queens are a bit more different. Again, they have the large head and the small abdomen. But it's only found in some sandy areas and not all sandy areas. And the reason for that is because it uses a different host species, not Lasius niger, which is found very commonly. It uses one which is very rare itself and only found in a few sandy areas. That species is called Lasius samophilus. It's not a very good video, so you can't really see much here, but these are some nice samophilus burgers, a little bit like Lasius niger there. But in fact, they're smaller and lighter brown. They're quite cute little ants compared with niger, really. And samophilus means sand lover, alluding to the fact that they live in sandy areas, but just some sandy areas like Kendig Burrows, the Surrey Heath, Dorset Heath, and so on. So this is the host of Lasius meridionalis. So it's not surprising that Lasius meridionalis is not found elsewhere. It can only be found wherever the host species is found. So this is the species that will invade, that the queen will invade. And some years ago, this is a very old video back from VHC videotape days, transferred to digital. I was very lucky at Kendig to find a mixed colony between meridionalis and the samophilus host. So this is a video. These are the meridionalis. Hopefully you'll see some brown workers. See any? Yeah. Just coming in from the bottom. Yeah. So those are the samophilus workers. So this is proof that samophilus is the host of meridionalis. This is the kind of that temporary intermediate stage where the queen probably invaded the year before, or maybe the year before that, and there's still some samophilus workers still remaining. Okay. Another year, and they would have died out, and it'd just be a pure meridionalis colony. So that's really nice to find, because this is the gold standard proof, scientific proof, as it were, that samophilus is a host of meridionalis. Okay, and that's important to remember when I'm coming to tell you about the next species, which is Lasius mixtus. Okay, so Lasius mixtus is also really quite rare, not found very often, but it's much more widespread within Britain and even found in Scotland. So this is Lasius mixtus from the Highlands, the workers. This is a queen. The name mixtus kind of means the confusing Lasius, which probably alludes to the fact it's very hard to tell apart from the others. So it's very confusing in terms of trying to identify them. So mixed up in terms of how you identify them. So like the other Lasius, but two interesting things about mixtus are, firstly, the queens don't fly in the summer, they fly in late autumn. And they don't found colonies that year, they hibernate as wandering queens. And only in the very early spring, they carry on wandering and then try to invade a host nest. Okay. And the thought is that maybe that's because it's invading a nest where the workers are very cold, they're not aggressive, they're still trying to warm up, so maybe it's easier for the queen to invade at that stage. That's the speculation. I don't know if there's any proof of that. So they wander in early spring. But the trouble is, in terms of the host, for a long time we didn't know what the host was, because no mixed nests with another Lasius species have ever been found. So unlike that samophilus meridionalis nest, which is good proof of the host, there was no proof of host from mixed nests in this case. So what's going on here? What's happening? The queen looks like the normal phenotype, with a large head, small abdomen. Looks like it should be an invader, a killer queen. But without proving what the host is, then we don't know. So at least for a long time, it was assumed the host must be probably Lasius niger. That's what all the books said at the time. Way back in the 1990s, when I first found my wandering queen of Lasius mixtus in a place near Edinburgh on some sandy beach dunes near Edinburgh. Yeah, this was not known what the host was. So on the dunes, Lasius niger is a very common species. I found a wandering queen in the spring, cold day, March 1997. I took it home. I thought I was find out whether Lasius niger is the host. And I combined it with some workers of Lasius niger from the dunes as well, so from the location. And the result was very disappointing. So the queen was attacked, and to put it scientifically, was totally freaked out. I was so disappointed I didn't take any film or videos or anything like that.
Scientific term.
Make a video and send it around.
That's right, I misspoke. Sorry. Yeah, so I haven't got any pictures, so I guess I was so disappointed. But I've got an artistic impression of what it looked like through CGI. Right? So yes, it was clearly that the queen was being attacked. It was going to be killed. In fact, I think I kind of rescued it, but yeah, that was the end of that. So I clearly, either the queen was unlucky, and Lasius niger is not the host, or it is the host, but it was just unlucky on this occasion. So clearly, this invasion process is not easy, or else it's not the right host, and there's another host involved. It's not easy to find these wandering queens. So it wasn't until 2009 I was able to follow up that experiment. Very long-term project this was. Found another Lasius mixtus queen in April 2009, about a kilometre away. And the other common Lasius on the dunes is Lasius flavus, the yellow one, the one I began with, that forms its colonies unaided, right? So is flavus the true host of mixtus? So I took that queen home. I took about 30 flavus workers from the dunes, put them together in a little box again, and the result was dramatically different. It was a killer queen. So it's a killer queen of Lasius flavus. So the queen here just grabbed one of the workers, and the workers put up quite a fight, actually. It took the queen quite a while in this case. The video is pretty poor quality. My camera wasn't very good, but also I didn't want to use very much lighting because I wanted to keep the behaviours as natural as they were, as I could. But yeah, the queen immediately grabbed a worker, chewed it, wandered around. It was very hard to keep up with it. But over the next few hours, it just chewed those workers, and you had a little pile of dead workers there. And it just, I know. Look away now if you don't want to see dead workers. And it just dismembered them, doing the classic kind of behaviour, like Umbrasis does with Magic. And then I watched it for hours. Getting to the end of the day, I had to go to bed. So what's going to happen in the morning? Either it's going to kill all the workers, or the workers are going to kill the queen eventually. They seem they're keeping well out of the way at this point. They're already going to keep separate. So what do you think happened? What do you think when I got up the next day, had a look in there, it happened?
Happy families.
Happy families? Yes.
Yay!
Missed all this bit, but yeah, so I'm really good scientist, was I? But yeah, it was all peace and calm within the box. So this is the queen, no longer running around killing workers. It just becoming like a docile queen, surrounded by adoring workers, of the flavus workers. So clearly, what it did worked. So maybe it was absorbing the odor enough for the workers to be less aggressive to it. And of course, once they're less aggressive, then maybe the queen was also emitting like queenly pheromones that allow them to think this is the queen, right? And so now they're treating it like their queen, right? So yeah, I kept this for many years actually. So it prospered, produced the colony. After a few weeks, the queen had clearly been strongly fed by the workers. It had a much larger abdomen, or gaster, at that point. You can see a worker here actually feeding the queen right now. That was a few days later. And a few weeks later, laid a whole load of eggs, attended by the host workers. There's the queen coming to make sure they're doing a good job. And getting told to go away, right? And yeah, and I kept that colony for years. It grew and grew and grew. And presumably, at the end, it was actually all the flavus workers have been replaced by Lasius mixtus workers. But it's very hard to tell, so I don't really know for sure. But it does solve that mystery about why have no mixed nests with a host species ever been found in the wild? It's because how would you recognise yellow workers with yellow workers. It would be almost impossible to do that unless you
Can't
start.
just get the queen. I like the queen's not going to be
The queen's
sitting
gonna be-
there ready for you to look at.
No. Well, yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, so that was very pleasing. And of course, by this point, the other evidence that Flavus was the host had been coming out from others as well. So it's well established from a lot of different sources now that Lasius flavus is the host of Lasius mixtus. And Flavus is a very common species, obviously, very widely distributed. So mixtus is not found very often, but it's probably widely distributed and maybe quite common. We don't know.
Haven't been able to tell because it's like Flavus.
It's very so this is something actually you could join in to try and increase our knowledge. Actually, now that we know that Flavus is the host, we know how to find Flavus nests. Maybe we should look around those nests in spring to find mixtus queens and plot its distribution more. So I tried this in the spring. This is actually again Archerfield, East Lothian. I found a load of Lasius flavus mounds. Thought this would be a great site. Lots of host colonies right around. So I went and spent the day looking for this location. Spent like 3 or 4 hours there. Luckily, it's a very nice location. That's the other direction. It's right on the coast. Found no queen. Quite disappointing. But it was a very nice day. Cold, chilly, because it's April. Oh no, March in Scotland. Quite chilly still. But it should be the right time, right? So I went away, didn't find anything. Luckily, I was often on the fours trying to find these queens. Luckily, it's like a couple of kilometres away from a car park, so there's not many other people around. So I didn't get too many weird looks. Yeah, so I went away. I thought next week I'll try again, and I spent another few hours there. Had lunch, sitting on one of the next to one of the mounds. I kept looking around, just about to leave. I kept looking, and then finally I saw something. Can you see it? Probably not. This is the only picture I took before I thought, ah,
It's like in the middle.
just there. That's the only still photograph I took. There it was. You've got to keep your wits about you for hours and hours on end, and this, but they didn't see it. So I got some video, very quick video here. Very good because it kind of threatening to wander off into some grass. So I was really got a snapshot of the video there. That is the Lasius mixtus queen, looking for presumably a way into a Lasius flavus mound in the spring. And yeah, so I did take that home. Again, that's what the queen looked like on the rocks. And I've been doing some further kind of observational experiments on it as well with Lasius flavus workers there. So that's I'm not going to talk about the other species. I think Kevin may mention his talk about the other species. That's all I wanted to say. Hopefully that's given you an idea of, some of our native species have a lot of interesting biology, even if they don't look quite so great and so striking, I should say. But they have a lot of interesting biology that, and also that anyone can contribute to try and to learn more about these kind of species. If you know an area where you have a lot of Lasius flavus, mostly probably do know an area or find an area locally, it's only people that try and do early spring yourself. So thanks very much for your attention. If you have any questions,
Thank you.
happy to answer them.
So what would be, because we've actually every year now in Blanchard, I like when I'm walking the dog, I go in fields and I try to find where the mounds are for like a lot of the like species. Found a lot of flavus, and when they were flying, I didn't actually get to where it was in the fields. But
Yeah.
where would be the best place for us to like give the information, or
Right.
because it's something I do anyway when I'm walking the dog. Just go to fields, just keep walking and looking for like the mounds and
Yeah, well, even Lasius flavus, even just recording that, even though it's common,
Yeah.
we still like to know what its distribution is and whether it changes.
Yeah.
So High Record is a good place.
oh, what's it?
High Record, yeah. I mean, there's a. So I'm a member of the Beaver Semantic Recording Society, which collects this data, but they often get some of their data from High Record if it's been properly documented. If someone just says, "I found a Lasius mixtus," what's the proof of that? If you show a photograph, then
I mean, I've always got my phone too far. Sometimes, oh, it's gone now. So I was like, oh, this, or I've
Yeah.
seen like the old Bratters, I've seen like Mountain, you Brat, like
yes, yeah,
So again, I'm with the dogs out for the day. It's just
Yeah,
close.
yeah.
There's places to find something, just build up little, or even sell them and shit.
that will be accepted as a record, just seeing the mountains. But in terms of the workers, usually you need to take a few workers' specimens to look under the microscope. You can't tell them apart, except under.
I've done that in the past as well. If you want,
Yeah. Also, people are willing to help. I'd be willing to receive specimens that people want to be identified. I mean,
Yeah.
and there's a Facebook group, EBOS Amounts Recordings, where you can upload your photographs and say, so anyone know what the species is, and they'll tell you, you can identify that.
That's yeah.
Sometimes you can't.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions?
It's not really about killer queens, but we just got a Glacius flava for home,
Yes.
and I was just wondering if it's, you might know the answer to this already, but if it's a subterranean species normally,
Yes.
should you do anything different at home when you're keeping?
They adapt very well. I mean, in a home situation, they don't seem to mind coming out into a lit outworld. It would be a bit boring having them if you couldn't see them because you just hit them black or
It's slightly less active.
Oh, they're much more docile than this is Niger. You can open up the lid and they won't come and rush out. They will just wander around still. Goes much faster. Yeah, I like these species because you can look after them very well. I can leave the lid off the outworld and they won't even come out for the ambratus, and flavus is very similar to that. Yeah, and they can adapt. They don't, just like they can adapt to having their test tubes or their nests in light as well. They can adapt to that. I usually put cardboard on top of my nests. I leave the outworld open, and these species, even though they're subterranean normally, they need food. So they learn that they have to go into the outworld to get the food, and they're fine with it. Yeah. I don't put them in bright sunlight. They're in a sort of shady place within the room. Yeah.
Found anyone else that's got a mixtus colony? You're the first person I've
Well, yeah.
ever known to
No.
have that is mixtus colony.
No, I haven't. I guess they're not. Yeah, the
Not
colony found. Certainly not sold. Yeah, like Umbratus queens are the commonest to find, which is why they're the ones that get offered.
Yeah.
The mixed queens you have to go out in spring. And of course, until recently, people didn't even
I'll
know
about this next spring. I've got a weird Glacius flag super colony. I'm going.
You never know. Yeah, you might be wasting holidays, but don't blame me if you do.
Middle of Jarman on a nice day. It's not really a waste. Like.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's very rarely recorded, but it's probably much commoner than we know it, just because they don't form the mounds. These other spore species don't form the mounds like flava, so you can't even find them from that point of view. Not unusual for mounds. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.